Hello, welcome to the Tao of Love and Sex, Conversations with Arorah. This is my new podcast, and this is episode 1. I'm very happy to have Lao with me. He has been a very dear friend in my life, and I want to be interviewing him regularly. Today's commentary with him is going to be about the sexual awakening of a Taoist priest. So thank you for joining me, Lao.
Well, thank you for having me, my dear. It's a pleasure to be here, and I definitely want to get into these conversations, so I can only imagine where they're going to go. So
we are totally going to get into some conversations as we go. But I wanted this first interview to really be about your life, so that my viewers would have a chance to see who you are. You've had a very unusual life, and we're going to get into it. But I also wanted them to see who you were, and so that as time goes on and people maybe will want to ask you questions about certain topics, they'll have an idea about who they're asking these questions to. But before we start, I'd like to just know if people wanted to get in touch with you, where would they go, and what is your website?
The best way to get a hold of me, it would be through the Four Dragons Institute website. So it's fourdragoninstitute.com. You can go to any of the contact pages there, or my email address is lao@fourdragonsschool. For dragons is a plural, school.com. That's pretty much the easiest way. I get emails pretty much from all over the world right now. I have about 130 students on 5 continents. In my distance education program, I have about 60 right now. And so we range from South Africa, Australia, Tasmania, Europe, North America, South America. So it's pretty crazy.
That's really great. Well, thank you. And we'll hear more about that later, I'm sure. What I want to just start off with is your Taoist name is Lao Shi. That's Laoshi.
Mm-hmm.
And what does that mean?
Okay, so Lao Shi isn't really a name. It's sort of like a term of endearment. It just means old teacher. The character Shi can also mean priest or monk as well. So growing up, I lived in a monastery, and my shrivel gave me the sort of little mini dharma name Dalong, which means larger, or tall, long dragon, because I was so tall and lanky. At 14, I was taller than everybody in Chinatown. So, but the closest to my last name in English was Lao, and so Lao just stuck, and so it was Lao Dalong. And then eventually, when I became a Dragon Gate priest and abbot, as well as a Zhengyi monk, the surname Lao just stuck. So it's my priest name is Lao Zhi Chang. Lao just being the sort of the surname, and then Zhi is the 21st generation Taoist priest name from the lineage poem, and then Chang means perfect clarity. So Zhi means perfected, and Chang means clarity. But most people just call me Lao Shi, or even better, just Lao. It's easy, doesn't take much to remember. It's pretty universal, although it's interesting because I look like I'm from Asia, Western descent. So most people are like, wait, you're Lao? It's like,
that's great.
Call me whatever you want.
Well, tell me, what is the two lineages that you are a priest in? Talk about them just quickly, just so that people understand when you say you're a Taoist priest, what that actually means, and what are these two different schools that you belong to?
Sure. So Taoists originated the concept, or the term Taoism originated with a guy named Zhang Daoling. He is the first celestial master. He started the temple in China in Sichuan province known as Qingshan Mountain Temple. And he started the first overall school or sect of Taoism known as Zhengyi. Zhengyi means Orthodox unity or Orthodox oneness. And he started it there at Qingshan. And so he literally put everything together in a way where he was teaching people how to cultivate this thing called the way. And eventually he returned back to his home, which is in Longhushan, or Dragon Tiger Mountain, and started the Celestial Masters subsect of Zhengyi. Now, Zhengyi is the southern school today it's called, and it's a 100% Taoism. There's no Buddhism or Confucianism or anything else. And so my master was raised Chan Buddhist, but he wasn't born that. He was actually born to two Taoist priests from Hua Mountain. And so they entered him at 6 years old into the monastery at the nearest place on Song Mountain, which is a Taoist mountain. And he lived there with his master. When the Cultural Revolution happened, they had to leave that because anybody who was practicing Buddhism or anything like that openly was murdered. And so he traveled with his master from Henan all the way to Sichuan. In Sichuan, he left his master. His master went up into the Himalayas. He was told to come back across the United States. I mean, the United States, southern China, towards the United States. And when he got there, to this little place in Yunnan, there was a little Awaken to reality, or called Wujianbai sect of monastery. It's very rural, very simple, very close to almost Chan Buddhism, which is, Chan is the Chinese version of what's called Zen. Zen,
right. Zen Buddhism,
so
right. Yeah.
The idea of being empty and on awakened to reality was very much that. And so my master stayed there basically to take respite, to refresh, to recuperate. And then while he was there, he shared his knowledge with them. They asked him, would you be an abbot? Would you be a priest here? He considered it, seeing as he was raised originally Taoist, but he couldn't stay there because he knew that he had to leave China altogether. It was his master's sort of last directive.
And what is a Taoist priest? Like, you're a Taoist priest. What does that mean actually to be?
So there's a Taoist priest, a wandering Taoist, and a Taoist monk. It's where it depends on where you want to take your vows to. So a priest takes vows to use everything you know about the Tao, whether it's about understanding how the 5 elements work, or the 8 phenomena, how they interplay with each other, how yin and yang interplay, how we come to, in this world, to have a physical avatar called the Po, all of these things. Once you learn all this stuff, a priest takes the vow to actually use it on behalf of all the people they have influence or care over. So if you're practice acupuncture, for example, or you taught meditation, or it doesn't really matter what your job is, that you can help people to see the way, how it flows through their life, and then how to accord themselves so that they can live with the ability to accept and allow that life is life. It's perfectly fine. It's been this way forever. You have to stop resisting, right? Resisting what is what creates suffering. And that's a very Chan idea. So the priest helps people to understand their nature, their identity, and then their original nature. And eventually, if those people, can accept their nature, then they can accept their place in the overall nature of life. And then they can, just like all the animals out in the world, they can live with each other in a better harmony, right? The lion and the gazelle, they don't have enmity within one another. They have a place to play, and there's time when one eats the other or one kills the other, but they don't live in enmity. They live in a frank, honest acceptance that each of us has an integral part to play in this process. And so they go about their life understanding and trying to be their nature. And that's what a Taoist priest does.
So tell me, where did this all start? Where were you born? How did you come into the world? And how did you start to find?
Well, I was born a poor child in Mississippi. No, I was born in San Francisco Bay Area, just outside of Oakland and San Francisco. And then about 6 years old, my parents died. And when my parents died,
did you have any other siblings, brothers and sisters, or?
I had a half sister, and she sort of looked after me for a couple of years. But I was pretty much a feral child.
Do you remember your parents very much?
I don't remember much of my dad at all, and I don't remember much of my mom. I have like certain memories, but nothing major. So about 8 years old, I was in school, and a kid had made a really ugly comment to me about.
Let me just go back a minute,
Sure.
Because you said you were a feral child.
Yeah.
Can you explain that a little bit more to us?
Sure. Okay. Yeah. So I used to eat fruit off of trees. I used to pretend like I was playing with people at like a barbecue so I could stuff hot dogs in my pocket. But I pretty much just lived as off instinct. I just
Where were you living at the time?
my half sister, she was 18, and so I lived with her. But I didn't see her for 3 or 4 days at a time sometimes. So it was, I didn't know any better. One of the last books my mom read me was The Jungle Book. So Mowgli's mom died and dad died. So I thought, well, what the hell? Mine did too. Wow. So I thought, just like him, I was going to meet a bear and a panther one day.
How did they die?
Cancer.
Oh, really? Both of them at the same time?
About a year and some change apart.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. And was it a long process, or was it very quick?
With my mom, it was, they told her October 11th, and they said, you got 6 months to live, and 6 months to the day she was gone. And then my dad, they found it, and then he just had weeks.
Wow.
Yeah. So no, it wasn't a drawn out process, but it was more of a very confusing time because I didn't understand how any of those things worked. I didn't really understand.
Were you close to either of them?
Well, my mom was my world. That was all I knew. I mean, from the age of 2 to 4, I had pneumonia, and I had been in and out of the hospital. I was like in 3 or 4 months, out a couple of weeks, but right back in. I guess when I was 2, I had taken a bite out of a Nerf football, and it had lodged on my lungs, and they couldn't find it. It was so small, but it just kept giving me pneumonia.
Oh my
God. So my mom had been there with me the whole time, and so she was my world. And when she died, I had no concept of what the world was going to be like. I had no clue. And the world wasn't a hostile place to me, but it was a very confusing place, and bigger people had tempers. And so I learned to avoid them at all costs. Kind of like the monkeys in The Jungle Book. Yeah.
So you lived with your sister who was 18, and were you in school at the time?
Yeah, so the school that I was in, they knew my mom died, so the teachers tried to look after me every now and again, but I lived maybe a block from the elementary school, so it wasn't any big deal at all. And I would just kept going to school because I thought, well, it's just what you do. It was just on autopilot, I had no clue. But when I got done with school, I didn't do anything they told me to do. I learned to read very quickly. I learned to math very quickly. School was very easy for me, but I was more interested in jumping off of roofs and climbing trees, and there's a little creek, and grabbing fish or something out of it. I mean, that's what pretty much consumed my time, was how to get better at those, and a lot of adventures and stuff like that.
So in a certain way, you were living in a jungle. In a certain way, you had to really survive, not just as a child who lost his mom and dad very tragically, but also like live in a world and figure out how you're going to get food and how you're going to just like live. Like,
yeah, absolutely. And so Northern California is known for its fruit trees, its nut trees, and all that kind of stuff. So it wasn't that hard. There was a lady had a pomegranate tree. When the grass was wet in the morning, I would run and slide along the grass, grab the pomegranate, and keep going. Interestingly enough, Mowgli used to wear just underwear, so I used to just run around outside in my underwear.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah.
Well, you're lucky; it's warm there, right? So
yeah, it doesn't get really cold at all. It didn't snow at all during that time, so. There were times I didn't have a jacket, so I just had a pair of jeans and a pair of t-shirts, but whatever. I made do. I would sleep under a house sometimes if it got too cold, and it'd be warmer under there, so made do.
So tell me what happened. You said that you had a teacher. You had a Zen Buddhist teacher. How did that happen, and how old were you? And go on with that part of the story.
I was 8 years old. I was at school, and one of the kids said something very ugly to me. And so we had a fight. And I didn't get suspended, but I got sent home for the last 45 minutes of my day. He got suspended for 3 days for it. But unfortunately, in my world, if my sister had found out I had gotten sent home from school, I'd have taken the beating of a lifetime. That's just not okay. And a lot of her, she had a lot to going through. I mean, all this just dumped on her at 18. So I can really understand her, but the poor thing, she just thought, you want to raise a good kid? Don't spare the rod. So I thought to myself, well.
So she had beaten you up before?
Several times. Yeah, several times. Yeah.
Would she use a rod, or, I mean,
good, belt, hand, whatever, just depended. Wow. So I got very adroit at making sure that I was not within eye or earshot of her. I didn't see her for 3 or 4 days at a time, like I said. So I made sure I minimized it, and then I just knew you behave a certain way and you don't make bigger animals angry at you.
Was she graduated from school, or was she still?
She just graduated. She had just graduated, yeah.
So she had her own apartment, and that you got, okay.
Yeah, and so what ended up
happening? How did you live? Like, where did you get money, or like what?
She worked.
So she supported both of you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's one of the hard things I think for her, is that that's not how she wanted to start out her life.
Okay, so she was pissed off.
Pissed off and hurt and sad and lonely.
Yeah,
and it was just very difficult.
Yeah, I'm sure.
So one of the things that had happened was I could find quarters, I could find, money along the way. And there's a train in San Francisco called BART. And it goes out to the Bay Area and into the city. And so I think it was like $1 or something then. And so I got on the BART train and I took it into the city. I thought, well, if I just blow it off, she'll never know. Because they didn't put a note on me or anything. So when I got to the city, San Francisco is always colder than all of the little towns around it. It's insane. And so it's like 90 degrees on the outside, 65 degrees. And I just had a t-shirt and a pair of jeans. So I got really cold. And then one of the stops said, next stop, Chinatown. So I was like, Chinatown? I like Kung Fu. That's what I'm thinking about, Kung Fu. And so I get off, and I don't know if you ever been to San Francisco, but the entrance to Chinatown is the big foo dogs and the big arches. And I was just like, cool. And so I'm walking down and seeing swords and tea shops and people walking. And I'm just like, wow, this is amazing. And I get to the T intersection of Washington and Waverly. And there was a restaurant. And the restaurant was called Four Dragons Restaurant.
Oh, okay.
And it had these big dragons and green tile. And I was just like, enamored, but it was really warm, and there was a big fish tank in there. And the fish were almost bigger than I was. And so I went in to warm up. And as I'm warming up, this little man in saffron robes and a bald head comes by and he goes, hey, you, come here, pick up chair, come meet. And I was like, oh my God, I'm in so much trouble. Like, I just didn't know what was going to happen. So I picked up a tray of teacups and we followed him. And then San Francisco has, basements. And so we went to the subterranean level, and underneath the restaurant, there was a monastery. And that monastery had big Buddhas and big incense and swords on the wall and fans and all kinds of stuff all over. And I was like, I have found heaven. And then he said, put tray down. So I put the tray down, and he looks at me and goes, wait, you're not boy from kitchen. Who are you? You pants upstairs? I take you. I was like, oh, please don't eat me. And so I told him the story about what had happened, because he couldn't lie to him. Even if you wanted to lie to him, he could just see right through you. And so I told him, and he says, we need to call you sister. I'm like, shut up. You're going to throw me a beating, man. I'm trying to avoid the beating here. He's like, maybe life not work out the way you think. So we waited for her to get down there, which was about 90 minutes. And of course, you can imagine she was so happy to be driving into the city. Right. To have to see me. I'm just like, I'm dead. She's going to kill me. So this is my last day on the planet. Thanks, little bald guy. And she showed up, and she was just like, so good to see you. I'm just like, yep, she's going to kill me. And my master was like, look, I old man. I so old. Need karma clean. You young. You have whole life. Let me take care of him. Young boys, always pain. Always so much problem. I help him. I be like mentor. And I was like, and she's like, oh, we can't pay you for that. I'm so sorry. It'd be great. He's like, no, I Buddhist. No work for money. I help him. It clear my karma. And she's like, And I could see these wheels turning in her head, and like, I can get rid of this millstone around my neck. And she's like, well, I mean, would I be able to see him? He's like, of course, come whenever you are. And so I was just like,
so you were going to stay there then?
Yeah. And I just was like, I don't know how you're pulling this off, old man, but keep making your weirdo magic work. So she said yes. And from that day forward, I lived at that monastery with 8 monks. There were 2 from China who were refugees from the Cultural Revolution, 2 from Tibet who were refugees from the Tibetan occupation, 2 from Thailand, 1 from Laos, and 1 from Cambodia. And they were there as refugees from the Khmer Rouge and the killing fields and all. And so,
was there anyone else? Well, I mean, you were pretty young. Was there anyone else as young as you, or what were the ages of everyone else there?
All the monks were, the youngest one was 79 and up into the 90s.
Oh my goodness. So you were just like living with like all these old people at age 6?
8. I was 8.
At age 8. And they were all men. Is that right?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Which does not really prepare you well for the Western world.
Wow. Well, okay. So, all right. So one of the things I guess I wanted to ask you is, in terms of your childhood, did you, to have a serious, a serious event happen, like your parents dying suddenly.
Sure.
But do you remember having any dreams or things that you thought you wanted to do? Did you have, how children say, I want to be such when I grow up, or, I have this dream of this. Did you have anything like that? Did you? No,
I wanted to survive. So my master was like, he's like, look, you come to me because Buddha say you have karma, you have to come to me. So I'll help you. So we would practice Qigong, Kung Fu, we practice all of the things. And he wasn't doing it because he was trying to make me, some great Kung Fu person. It was just I had so much energy. You probably don't believe this, but I was a pretty energetic child.
Oh, I do not believe that for 1 second.
So he ended up just giving me things like, because he was the medical monk for our temple. So he would be like, take this rice. See, the shop owner, or the restaurant owner was a devout Buddhist. That's why all the monks were there. He was basically taking care of them. They were all illegal aliens. But he just made the monastery. He's like, well, I'm going to get good merit for taking care of these Buddhists. So he would give them. They were
illegal then?
Yeah, they were all illegal aliens. All right. Yeah. But in Chinatown, nobody would know because outside services. So
half of the people were anyway, right?
So you would know. And so he would give me these big sacks of rice and be like, take this down to the herb guy and he'll give you sacks of herbs. So I'm running down there with, 40-pound sacks of rice and then dropping it off. And he's giving me, 20, 30 pounds of herbs and I'm running it back. And he's like, oh, Shifu forgot this. You help us, Shifu. Oh, man, run back down, get more. So I'm up and down the streets of San Francisco and I'm practicing Tantra and I'm practicing Jade Bedchamber and I'm practicing all of these things. Basically, just we practice 10 hours a day on non-school days and 6 hours a day on school days. The Diamond Sutra, the Heart Sutra, the great.
Did you have any idea that you were learning these very esoteric, cool things that people would just die to be able to have learned?
No, because about 14, I kind of started catching on, but at 8 years old. So one of my very first lessons with my shifu, we were walking and I was doing something and I wasn't paying attention. And he had a waxwood staff that he used, that he walked around with all the time. I don't know why. The guy could probably do backflips in his late 80s, early 90s, but the guy pretended all the time to be just a simple old man. But he would smack me really hard with the end of this staff, which wasn't very big, but waxwood is like a whip. And he just hit me. And I'd be like, and he'd be like, I no hit you. This your mind. Your mind. Every time you're not present, every time your mind agitate you, you feel the pain. I'm like, I'm pretty sure that was a staff, actually. I'm pretty sure he's like, no, it's Maya. It's not real. I'm like, I don't think CPS would agree with you, old man. And I asked him one time, I was, upset and in my angsty moments. And I said to him, Shifu, as an old Buddhist, how can you hit a child and not have bad karma? He's like, oh, I tell you, raising you, I could have all the bad karma in the world. Buddha forgive everything. I don't have to worry about no karma. All clean when I'm done with you. It's okay. It's perfectly fine.
Well, how did you, I mean, I'm just thinking about you, your personality, and, you know, like what you said, it's, you know, you were pretty independent. So here you are, you're living with this old monk, and he's teaching you and training you very, very strictly. How, like, how did you fall in line with that?
Well, so he didn't raise me just Buddhist. In fact, I would say he pretty much knew I wasn't actually going to stay a Buddhist. But he himself had been raised up till 6 years old as a Taoist. His parents were Taoist priests. At 6 years old, they had him on Song Mountain, which are one of the 5 sacred Taoist mountains. And they did his birth chart and said that he should have been a monastic. And so, very practical Chinese mother, where's the nearest a monastery? It was a Chan Buddhist monastery. So knocked on the door, Master Buddhist, Master Taoist, and next thing you know, boom, they entered there and he became a Chan. But the Chan master, so Hua Mountain is a Chuanzen, which is a northern complete reality school. That's Buddhism, Confucianism, and Taoism combined.
Right.
The Buddhism within Chuanzen is Chan. So being entered into a Chan Buddhist monastery, the differences between Chan and Tao would fit in a thimble. So his master let him keep practicing his Taoist precepts as well as the Buddhist simultaneously. So I was raised with both. And so I couldn't really do wrong things, but it was always questions like, I would say to him, Shifu, I feel like I don't belong anywhere. I don't look Asian. These people don't accept me as Asian, but I'm not a Westerner, and I don't know. He says, oh, so if I take chi and I plant it far away from forest, is it still tree or what it now? I'm like, well, it's still a tree. Oh, good. I'm like, but it's not part of the forest. He's like, yeah, maybe forest just bunch of trees hanging out with each other, calling themselves forest. Maybe not all trees supposed to be forest. And I was like, and he would just leave me with it. And he'd just walk off and just leave me with that stuff. So I always learned to question what is, not question authority, but to question what is, to question my mind. And so that helps quite a bit when you're going through the teenage angst, but it gets you in a lot of trouble with adults and Western authority figures, who are like, well, this is the way it is. And it's like, well, okay, but explain that. Like, is it because you say it is? Because it seems rather arbitrary. Can you justify that position? And what if everybody can't do that? Then are you imposing? I mean, is this like a soft tyranny, or how does that work? And you're being sincere, and you're encouraged at the temple to be sincere. Right. And then Western civilization is like, don't ask questions, keep your head down, and all. So I learned to be very malleable around Western people, but that's how it was. And so I was learning Chinese medicine, so I was learning all the Taoist philosophies and how medicine works and how all of these different processes happen within the psyche and the soul, all of those things. So it was a very interesting time. Did not help me with my social or my love life, let me tell you, because, this girl wrote me this 3-page handwritten letter backwards and forwards telling me all of her emotions and feelings and how much she loved me and all. So I read it. We were in trigonometry class. So I ripped it up. I threw it and so I'm just watching the teacher, and she screams. She's like, why would you do that? I'm like, look, I read it. It's okay. We could talk about it later. And she's just like, I put my heart into that. I'm like, yes, I got that. But the paper is just paper. I'm not attached to paper. Right? You think you're being totally unattached. And apparently 16-year-old girls do not follow the Buddhist non-attachment precept. And I tried to tell her, look, the first noble truth, suffering is because of desire. You gotta let go. Does not actually help a teenage girl. And then so I got kicked out of the class and told if she doesn't get back in here, you're both suspended. And so I was like, oh, Jesus. So it was very difficult. And she was just like, why would you do that? I poured my heart out. I'm like, yeah, but I'm not sure that has anything to do with me. That sounds like
when she wrote that, did you like her? Were you interested in her, or was just
I
that?
didn't see the world that way. You don't grow up with bald men who are celibate and really think of the world that way. You think, okay, now I had hormones. I was a teenager, but at the same time, I was like, yeah, but you're going to do you and I'm going to do me. And so, I mean, we have our moments, but when you're not here, I'm not here. I just do you. And apparently that doesn't really go over well.
I want to get back to relationships, but before we leave your teacher, your Buddhist teacher, your Buddhist Taoist teacher, two questions. One is, why did you choose to stay with him? Because that also, brought a lot of, I mean, you really had to work while you were there in a lot of ways that you wouldn't have to work if you were just, again, free, just a feral kid running in the streets.
Yeah.
But secondly, did you find that you just loved him, or what are your feelings about him? Like, what did your relationship turn into?
So I never even thought after my first day about life away from him, although it was on the table that if you don't do what you're told, if you don't learn, if you don't train very hard, if you don't put everything you have in it, you have to leave the temple. Like that was just implicit. So it never occurred to me to leave the temple, because when you're around him, even though he was a very austere, stern teacher, and I don't mean stern as in angry, he was never angry, but he was stern as in implacable. You were going to do this. It was going to be that way. That was it. And so you get upset, you can cry, you can whine, you can do whatever you want. You're still going to do it, even after all that, and probably tired. So might as well just do it.
Yeah.
But the man had a way of making you feel like the world can be falling around you, and he would just sit and he would smile and you're just like, everything's okay. So I felt like with him, the world was always going to be okay. Like everything was going to be okay. I went through the worst beliefs and times of my life during those periods.
How many years altogether were you?
10, 8 to 18.
Altogether. So 18 is so from 8 to 18.
Yeah. And so by the end of that, I was just like, he gave me the choice. Like about 4 months before I left, he said, look, you're gonna have to make a decision. Do you want to stay and be ordained as a Buddhist monk and live here? Or do you want to take your vows and be ordained as a wandering Taoist and then go wander and follow the Tao? And I was just like, and it was one of the things I knew eventually was going to come, but I didn't know like what that really meant until it happened. And but I really wasn't prepared. And so I was just like, damn. And so I really lived my whole life like this is just how life is going to be. The other monks, tolerated my presence, but they were kind of at the end of their life, so they didn't really put too much into me. They would show me things.
Who did you talk to or confide in? Did you have friends, or were there any other peers that you
I had a couple friends, but I was very, very closely guarded about my shifu and about the temple because they were illegal, and I never wanted to do anything to put that in jeopardy. But I did have a couple friends. And but it's really my shifu, like I could come home from school and let's say I had a really messed up time with the teacher or something like that. I would come in and my shifu would be like, he's like, Talong, why she say that to you? What did you do? I'm like, well, shifu, I didn't tell you anything about what happened today. Like, how did you know about that? I old man, I forget things. You help us, shifu. Tell him what happened. I'm like, okay, let's do pretense. So, but he just knew. And so there was really nothing, but even if
he knew because he was psychic or something, is that what you're saying?
It's possible. To be honest with you, we never spoke of it. Even if I tried to ask him, he'd be like, oh, I think you're crazy. I don't know what you talk about. But he always knew things. He knew 100%. And if I screwed up or did something or whatever, he never scolded me. He never punished me. He was always just like, I'm so proud of you. Very good. I'm like, I kind of really screwed that up. He's like, no, you young man. It's behind you now. You have whole life. You never do again. How lucky you. You don't want to be old man do that. Very good happen when you're young. So like there was always this feeling of that life is natural. Life is going to happen, whether you try to stop something or try to do something. It doesn't matter. Life is going to be life. So how do you respond to life? That was one of the biggest themes through everything. And so no matter what happened in my relationship with him or with other people or whatever, he would always just be like, oh yeah, yeah. So I think I understand your problem of like, you really, I mean, you really, you get it? He goes, yeah, you stupid.
That's good. That's good. So I want to just interrupt you 1 second. Your mic is going in and out, so maybe if you just brought it a little closer, it wouldn't be changing. That's good. Yeah.
Okay.
So I want to segue into this part of your story and you don't need to share it if you don't feel comfortable sharing it, because this is the sexual awakening of a Taoist priest.
Sure.
But I know that your teacher brought you through a very difficult time that had to do with the awakening of your sexuality. Mm-hmm. And if you want to talk a little bit about that.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I don't have any problems with it.
Okay.
As a teacher, if I don't have a lesson plan written. I have my life, and all I can do is live my life as a lesson and then transmit that. So about 11 years old, I was gang raped. And it was 5 boys. And I remember coming home to the temple. And I remember him being like, come here, sit down. What happened? And I was like, I mean, I don't, Shifu, I got in some trouble with some boys. He's like, you tell Shifu. You tell him what happened. I was like, I didn't really know how I felt. It was sort of, it had been probably an hour later, so I had no processing time. I didn't have any coping skills. I had no language. I didn't know what to.
I mean, was this your first sexual experience? I mean, had you had other sexual experiences? Was this your first one?
This was my first real one. Yeah. I mean, nothing, just normal children's exploring type thing. But this was my first real one, I suppose. Definitely with the boy. These were all boys. And then so they were all older than me. So I just didn't know what to make of it.
Was this something like you were out and just were they tracking you? How were
they kind of sort of cornered me. Uh-huh. Yeah. They sort of cornered me. And
were they a gang that
they were just 5 friends, and they saw I was young. I knew a few of them already. Uh-huh. And then there was one lead guy, and I don't know what happened in his life, but you could tell he kind of wasn't right. And the others, that early adolescent chimpanzee behavior, they just sort of went along with it.
Wow.
And so my shifu was like, sit down, you tell shifu, you tell me. So I told him the story, but normal would be, you edit parts and you just sort of give the general overview because you don't know where you stand with it. And he goes like, oh, well, you have to help me because I, old man, don't understand English sometimes. So, tell me story again. So he made me tell the story again. And afterwards, I think I forget some things. Okay, because you said some things first story, but okay, tell me story again. And then he started interrupting me like, okay, what's that taste like? Or how'd that feel? Or what noise that sound like? Or what it smell like? And he started going through. So on the first day, I told the story 7 hours straight, over and over and over. On the second day, it was 10 hours. On the third day, it was 6 hours. By the end of that third day, I was like, look, I'll sign up to have it happen again if you just never make me tell this damn story again. This sucked. And he's like, yeah, good. He's like, now you're free of story. You don't have to keep living it over and over. You get it out. You talk it through. You understand. No trauma no more. Life, not nice, not pretty, but life, important. Now you understand. No need to go over in your head. You're free from story. It was one of the greatest gifts that I had ever gotten in my whole life, because from that day forward, I never thought of it as this thing to be ashamed of or afraid of or anything. And I never really even saw myself as, and I've had this a lot because I've had, clients and patients and students for the last 10 years teaching. And a lot of them have had something similar or likewise. And a lot of them, they put themselves into it like they had a part to play. Like they and you don't, right? So my shiva once said to me, he said, if I take a rock and I bash man head in, is the rock guilty? I'm like, well, no, it's a rock. He's like, right. It's man who wield rock's problem, not rock. You like a rock. Oh, almost everywhere in the world, you like rock. Not your fault, not your problem. You're accessory, not you. And so I never felt like I had to take ownership or responsibility over something, because I understood that I was really more of a means to an end, and that this was really something messed up within them. But that's the way it was. Every time something came up, you dealt with it directly. You dealt with it immediately. You didn't put stories to it. You didn't put implications like, well, if this is this, then this must mean that. Like, that was one of the main things that happened over and over and over in my life. And so sexuality became a very natural thing, but the natural world sexuality isn't like a Harlequin romance novel or a Meg Ryan movie, right? It's you have aggression and sexuality, and you have passion and sexuality. And then there's also self-discovery and also spirituality, but those are less known in the West. Those are, so it's usually just passion or aggression, or even stress management, I suppose some people use it for. But
exactly.
But when I was about 14, there was a Taoist man in Chinatown, and my shiva, being a Buddhist monk, he obviously is not going to teach me. He taught me the personal hygiene practices to keep your, prostate and your body in good shape. But he sent me to learn the sexual hygiene practices between a male and female, with this man and his wife who were Taoists. And so they taught me initially for the first couple of years the Chinese medicine versions, how the gene worked and all of these type of things. And then at 16, how the jade gate worked, the stem, why there's, the flushing, how the chi works, and then how the gate, the vagina is the jade gate, how the gate and the heart are really the one complete organ, one complete thing. And so all the things of the heart are birthed through the gate. That's, that comes into this world. And so there was a lot of training in that. And so it was extremely helpful in my own self-development, but extremely difficult because it made my working with people in the Western world and girlfriends, made it very difficult because they didn't understand these things, and they were using sexuality to find who do I belong to, and am I worthy? And it was like, that's not how that works. You got to go away. And then they felt rejected by me. And it was like, literally, I thought I just did the most kindest thing in the world and didn't make you barter your sexuality for worth or validation. And apparently that doesn't go over well. It's like, just go with the premise, please. I need to hate myself. And it's like, I can't be a party to that.
Do you think that part of that is just the confusion that we have in the West? Like, well, first of all, two things come to my mind when you're talking about this story is that he was training you. So here is I'm assuming that he is as a Buddhist monk, that he is celibate. Is that right?
Yes.
Right. Okay. So here's a celibate monk making sure that you are trained correctly in the Taoist practices of sexuality, or even just the human practices of sexuality. Yep. So in a certain way, you are going to people who are teaching you things that we don't even address here in the West at all. So, so the question that I just have for you in terms of now you're looking back at this, as Westerners, the way in which we approach our sexuality, what did you said it was really awkward for you to try and live in both of those worlds, but what is your observation about how we deal with teaching sex, to our kids and to our adolescents, and what do you think Eastern methods and techniques and Taoist philosophy, how could that help our Western world?
Well, unfortunately, the West doesn't teach anything. I mean, they teach biomechanics, I think, and even that is as rudimentary as you can get, and it leaves more questions and feelings of squeamishness than it does actual humanity. They teach nothing. It's basically like, do not put a penis in your mouth or inside of you, or don't put your penis in a mouth or inside of anybody until you're an adult, because it's not good, because it's barely tolerable, whatever, because of Protestantism, as it's whether they practice it openly or it's just inculcated into the culture. And then you're supposed to somehow find a mate, go through this whole morass like a roulette goddamn wheel, and hopefully you survive the physical, psychological, and spiritual implications while being taught societally that your worth is in your sexual prowess, which you have no idea what the hell that even means. So good luck. And so that's why VHS and videos, you know, were driven by porn, and the internet was driven by porn. And there is no teaching. It's literally, you're just basically left to, I hope you can figure it out, but most likely you're going to actualize this in an archetypical way, which will probably show up as some sort of fetish or some sort of personality aggression, because you don't know how to actualize your sexuality, and you're going to resent people. And then eventually, I think in my personal practice here, seeing patients and clients over 10 years, about 80% of them had extramarital relationships in sexually. And, you know, people be like, I feel so bad, I shouldn't do that. I'm like, why? She's like, well, you know, that's really not good. You shouldn't do that. I'm like, really? Because 80 out of 10 people walking in this door do. I think that's called the majority. I think by most standards, you would call that normal. But I don't know why. And again, I'm not an advocate for polyamory. I'm not an advocate for monogamy. I'm not an advocate for any of it. I'm an advocate for reality and the Tao itself. And to be honest, if you can't understand even the basics about human psychology and sexuality and realize you're going to have to work through stuff that you don't understand about yourself, and you have to have a context for that. And there's no context for that. There's just no context. So if a boy wants to wear girls' clothes and put on nail polish at the beginning of his sexual adventures, he's considered weird or crazy or whatever else. But he's not. He's not that at all. He's just trying to figure things out. And most likely, what implications does it have? None. But the damn kid is literally has to this minefield of, well, if I do this, it must mean that. And it's like, no, that doesn't mean that at all. That's crazy talk. You have to work out these things, and you have to figure out where these things come from. And that could be an attachment to the feminine side of himself that he lost because being raised in a certain way. Or there's a lot of implications. It doesn't have anything to do with it, because your sexuality has almost nothing to do with penises and vaginas. It has to do with the expression of your own balance of yin and yang within yourself. So talking through my own sexual experience with those people, I didn't think of myself as gay or broken or dirty, or I didn't think of any of those things. I simply thought of, there was an event that happened. It was really about anger and pain. So the concept of sexuality never really entered into that, because my shiva was explaining to me, he's like, no, that's not sex. They didn't have sex with you. I'm like, but I thought, he's like, no, I was 11. So, but he's like, no. He's like, if a man puts his finger in your mouth, does he have sex with you? He's like, no, it doesn't work that way. He's like, you have to really pay attention to implications and intentions and all these things. And it's like, oh. But then people have these hard and fast rules. They're like, well, everybody knows. And it's like, everybody's a miserable ass too. So I don't know if you want to go with that everybody knows shit. And so you really begin to find out that, you know, sex is broken into 4 categories. There's procreation, which everybody thinks they know. And then there's recreation, which, I mean, the West has their version, and yay, I guess it's a thing. And then there's restoration, you know, and then there's transformation. And that transformational sexuality is where you start to understand the spiritual implications. The problem with the West is when they hear that, they're like, so I can have sex and it can be transformational? Usually that's just a cop-out to get out of their Judeo-Christian or Semitic guilt about whatever sexuality means to them. But it's like you're not going near transformational sex until you work through recreational and restorational. And so that takes somebody willing to be honest with you, and it takes the person to be able to be radically honest. And I know people who've had multiple partners, and they think, well, yeah, you know, I've had sex. And it's like, I'm so sorry, but if you call that sex, ouch. I mean, you have my condolences, but damn, that's ouchy.
So you're married. You have actually you've been married twice. Am I getting? Do I remember that right?
Yep.
And you have a daughter with
Yep.
One wife, and then you're married now, and you have 2 sons. So just to follow up on your thought here about what sex is, with the 2 different women that you've been with, how is that? How was it? I mean, you were very young the first time, and the second time. How has that changed? And what would you say sex is?
In terms of my own, when I was young, so when I left the temple to be a wandering Taoist, because the whole bartering was, you can stay in the temple, become a Buddhist monk, but you have to be celibate, you have to be a vegan or very vegetarian, and you have to just chant the sutras. I'm like, celibate. It's good to see you, old man, but the Tao's are calling. And so I actually left as a wandering Taoist, and I went off to live in about 50 different countries. And so I was living kind of a rock star's life. You know, the pendulum was over here in a monastery. And so when that pendulum swang, you know, I felt that cultural exchange was very important. So I exchanged with a lot of cultures. Which was,
So
but I never
you're saying you had a lot of sex. Is that
no?
Okay.
I would say I enjoyed myself spiritually and physically.
Okay.
But you know, and some people say, "How you grow up with these monks?" And it's like, yeah, but I was trained that you have to live contextually appropriate to the time of your life. As an early 20-year-old, late teen, that's contextually appropriate for your life. You know what I mean? And so that's what I went to do. And so I was living a rock star's life. And at the time, my daughter's mom was kind of like, I would like to do this. I would like to do that. And I would like to have this sort of sexually free life. I was like, sounds good. I'm traveling the world. I don't care. And so I really didn't know how sort of life worked, though, you know, in terms of family and all that. And so she's like, well, I'd like to have a child. And I was like, I guess that's what you do, right? I mean, I'm a grown up. I have a house, an apartment now. So the kids, yes, we'll kids it. It's good. We're going to kids.
And you were married at the time?
Well, we got married, yes, for the insurance for the kids and all that kind of stuff. But I had no idea what that really meant. I had no examples of that, nothing. I was just like, seems legit. Gonna follow the Tao. It's in front of me. Why not? Because a wandering Taoist literally just does what's in front of them and says yes to life. You just become the yes. You know what I mean? So I was just like, and that went wildly awry. But it was extremely illustrative of just because you can doesn't mean you should. And so that was a big deal for me. And so, yeah, I had a daughter, but I was traveling the world, and I was in so many countries, and I was gone, and I wasn't.
Was that when you were also in the army or
the Navy? Yeah,
the Navy. Okay, the Navy.
Yeah. So I was traveling around the world, and so when I would get home, I'd spend time with her and all, and the relationship with her mom wasn't really a relationship like, oh, we're married and we love it. It wasn't like that at all. I had no concept of that. It was just, we have a kid and that's what you do. And I'm going off to Liberia now. See ya. You know, or I'm going off to Cambodia or wherever. And so the marriage or relationship portion only lasted a couple of years. And then I kind of was very circumspect about getting into any type of real relationship. So I would have this sort of feeling like, look, I'm here with you now and we're doing this thing and all, but I'm going to be around the world. And so if you want to have any type of relationship with me or whatever, it works like this. When I'm with you, I'm with you. But if I'm not with you, I'm not with you. And I try to be very transparent and very open that my vows, my path, all of that was more important to me. And I didn't want to lead anybody on or give anybody false hope. And so it was really about trying to understand. So I lived with Sufis and Sikhs and Jains and Gnostics and Swamis and Vodouns and Kabbalists. And then eventually about 22, 23, I ended up at the Temple of the Jade Bedchamber. And that's where...
And where was that?
That was in the mountains between Laos and Cambodia, because that's a proscribed teaching. China, you cannot learn those things at all. And the place that is in those mountains, it's not too far from the Thai place, and you have to be invited there. You can't just show up.
How were you invited?
So I had been given these. My master gave me these as a symbol of our lineage right before I left. They're two dragons, and he did them with the quill of a quail before I left the temple. And somebody in Thailand had seen me and had seen it and was like, "Hey, man, where did you get those?" And we had a conversation, and then not a few hours later, he's like, "Hey, there's this temple. Would you like to go? There's some people there that would like to meet you." And so we got in a truck and we traveled 7 hours by truck. I was in the back, so we just went through the jungle, and then eventually we get to this part of this mountain that kind of goes up, and then underneath, inside the back of the mountain, inside of here was where the temple is. So you wouldn't even know. You could be standing on top of it and not know it's there. We went down around this little place. We went in there, and actually there was a monk there that I had known years before, and I guess he had this guy had described me, and he's like, yeah, bring that guy. And so that's how I had known somebody there.
Why was it so secluded and secretive? What were the reasons for having
you could be killed by learning those things. Learning the bedchamber arts in China, you'd be put to death for it. It's not allowed. And most of these people are Chinese expats. And then obviously with the Khmer Rouge and a lot of
expats, what are you talking about?
Expatriates.
Expatriates.
Yeah.
So this happened after Mao.
Yeah, it probably started in the mid 60s. But they all left in probably 1950, 1951. And so this temple, I don't know if the temple it had been old, so it might have already been there, and they just sort of like a hermit crab took it over. But they fortified it and made it pretty secluded, because if because some really powerful stuff happens there, and it's not for everybody. It's hard. People think it's not like Osho's ashrams. It's not libertine. People there.
It's not Montauk. So just so my listeners can understand what you're saying, because there's a lot of things that you're going through very quickly that you'll have to know a little bit about Taoism. What is exactly the Jade Bedchamber practices? What are they? Why would Mao? Why would you be killed? Like what was it about them that would bring about?
So anything to do with
be legal for practicing them.
Okay, so first, it wouldn't be just the bedchamber arts. It would be all superstitious or magic or anything like that. Okay, all of it was
all included. Would you say within that lineage?
Yes, true. But like Buddhists were being killed outright. Like China is atheist. It is no superstition. They want none of that. You know what I mean? They want none of it. And so just wearing robes would get you killed. But even after Chairman Mao died and Pang took over, it was still within Taoism today, you don't practice the sexual arts because it leads to free thinking, it leads to self-discovery, it leads to mystical experiences, and these things are not allowed in China. You cannot do these things in China. And the Thai government is extraordinarily Buddhist. And so they definitely don't want, Bangkok has its own thing going, but they
don't want it because of the sexual nature of it, and they want to remain.
Right.
Okay.
Right. And also, this is a form of alchemy. This is a form of internal alchemy that they want no part of, because they did their best to stamp out all magic and mysticism. They wanted nothing to do with it. And even within Taoism today, the head of the China Taoist Association is like, there will be no talk of sexual alchemy within Taoism. It just causes too much problems. And I honestly agree with them. As much as I really deeply love that because I don't think of sex in the way that most people think of sex. I don't think you have to be naked with somebody to have a great sexual relationship with them. You never even have to touch them if you truly understand what it is. But most people, you know, like especially what you see with the whole Osho movement and all is that, and I'm not putting them down, that's their thing, and I don't, Taoists do not judge. But you cannot say, oh, well, I want to assuage my guilt, so I'm going to just say it's spiritual and then go live this libertine lifestyle, because it's really bad for the psyche. It's actually terrible. And then that usually causes all sorts of mammalian and simian responses in you, and people kill each other over and kill themselves, and it gets really very difficult.
And this is probably one of the problems with yoga practices that have come to the West or other places where there's a guru and a lot of things happen that end up really actually hurting the psyche a bit.
Yeah. And so that's why the China Tao Association today is like, just, they're not ready for it. It's not that it's bad. It's not that it's wrong or evil. It's that it's like giving a 4-year-old a loaded gun. It's just a bad idea. Let them grow up first. Leave it alone. Because even in the training and the people that I went through the training with, a lot of people left. A lot of people could not handle it. They couldn't get past the cultural programming. They couldn't get past their own limited belief systems. They couldn't get past any of those.
And you're talking about these were Chinese people?
Some Chinese, some Sumatra, Burma, Indian, Thai, Vietnamese. They came from all over.
You were the only American?
Maybe there was one other at one point, and a few Europeans here and there, but not really. Mostly, no. They had the hardest time with it more than anybody.
Because had the hardest time.
The Europeans, the Anglo-Europeans descent always had the hardest time, because they, as much as people could be like, well, I'm not Christian, I'm not this, you don't realize socially how much gets inculcated in you. And
right.
so a woman can say, yes, I believe this and it's fine. I'm totally free with it. But then when real stuff happens and they get to these real places where you feel this spiritual ecstasy, you want to clamp onto it and hold on to it. And when the guy's like, okay, well, have a nice day, the rejection, the pain, right. I'm not good enough, I'm horrible, I'm a whore, whatever.
Right.
And it's terrible for the psyche. And so the matron almost never. The only reason why I got to train there is because, one, I was raised by a Taoist, and two, the other monk vouched for me. But even for me, even living that way, it was still very difficult for me, because
what was the hardest thing for you?
You have to look at yourself and realize everything is just a projection of you. And so everything you find repulsive, that's you. And everything you find attractive, that's you. And everything that scares you and you hate is you. And so it's all just you. And so the shit that you rail against and, oh my God, and they did that, that's all you. And you have to sit with that. And there's no running away. You know, sometimes the guys would be there and you'd be naked and the women would just walk in a circle around you, all these women, and you'd be seeing they're naked, and then they would just start laughing. Ouch. Yeah. It's like, even if you're like, I wouldn't get, you do. It's hard. So
how did you get through that? As a man,
you go through it. You go through it. That's what you do. You sit with it, and then you go into a dark room by yourself, and you just have to sit with it, and you go, so what is really happening? What am I really feeling? You have to, and the only way your salvation is radical honesty. It's a very difficult thing. You know what I mean? It's very, very difficult to live with, because it's like by the time you're in it, there's no preparing. You don't realize it because it just comes on all of a sudden, because these are all your hormones and neurochemicals and all that kind of stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's just very painful. But when you get out of it, you start seeing the world and you have more compassion on yourself and other people. And you realize that the highest practice of all of the arts is the same thing, whether it's Tai Chi, whether it's Chinese medicine, whether it's meditation, Neidan, doesn't matter. It's always that you have to learn to accept and allow what is.
Right.
And that's very difficult. And sexuality, biologically, can help you distract you from what is. So you have to keep going through it until you can see what is.
Let me ask you this question with just what you just said, because one of the things that I certainly hear from a lot of people, and I think everybody has, if they've been in a long-term relationship, feel like, not getting what I want from this person, and, the sex isn't as good, or, she's not doing what I want, or whatever. In terms of that experience that you had, what have you found in, in talking to people about things like that? Like what kind of responsibility do people have?
It's because they never allowed themselves to really be honest about what they wanted from the beginning. Mm-hmm. And what they want is an experience. They want to learn things. They want to understand things. The problem is when you're 16, 17 years old, people are like, oh, these kids shouldn't have sex. I mean, the majority of our species, teenagers had the babies. They're the ones that could survive the damn thing. So people are like, teenage pregnancy is a problem. Really? Because we wouldn't be a species if there was teenage pregnancy. But the problem is people aren't honest. I don't know anything about sex. Like 18-year-olds have the hardest time saying that. 50-year-olds have the hardest time saying it. But they don't know anything about sex. They don't know anything. They don't know how to ask for what they want because, well, I don't want to hurt them, or I don't want them to feel like this about me. They're trying to constantly manage somebody else's response instead of just being like, look, this is where I'm at. And it's a constantly evolving thing. And I don't know, at 20, you want to try this. But at 40, you want to try that. And you have to be honest about that. But people aren't honest about it. They stuff it way down, and then it builds up pressure and it comes out sideways. And they end up having dalliances or whatever else. And then
what if they are honest and the person that they're with doesn't want to do that?
Then you have to choose whether or not it's more important to do that or go do that somewhere else, or not do it at all. But you have to be honest about that, because not everybody has everything as their cup of tea. But see, this is where radical honesty and accepting, allowing. I know women, they're like, I just don't care about sex. And I know women are like, I need a good one often. But sometimes it's about because that's really what's in their nature. And sometimes they're trying to use it to accomplish certain, covering up with dad issues or whatever. You have to be honest about those things. And there's more embedded in that subject than most people will ever know. The problem is nobody talks about it. Like, nobody sits around and actually goes, when I was with my boyfriend, whatever, I was thinking about my dad's penis. Nobody wants to say that, but it happens. No guy wants like, oh, I just want to nurse and go to sleep. Nobody wants to say that, but it's there. And everybody lies to themselves. They suppress it. Freud said one of the biggest and almost only cause of mental illness is repression. Something being repressed. The West and their sexual repression of themselves, not called, but their own sexual repression, causes most of these things. And sometimes you just want to get crazy. And sometimes you just want something so tender and sweet, but you're like, I don't want them to think I'm weird or they'll think I'm crazy. It's like, you don't know enough to be weird or crazy. You're a Homo sapien. You should really read a book sometime to see how crazy our species is. Get over yourself. You're way too uptight with this shit. And then they start adding on all of the cultural superstitions about, oh yeah, Jesus, he don't want you doing this. And it's like, okay, good. Look, I love Mr. Jesus, man. I think Mr. Jesus is cool as hell. But if God didn't want you to touch yourself, why would he leave you alone with it within arm's reach?
Oh, your logic.
I mean, but seriously, it's worth pondering. No, but seriously, there's such a lack of understanding, and everybody puts their ideology to it instead of understanding how things actually work. Because there's, it's not all just magic and hocus pocus. There's neurotransmitters, there's hormones, there's those things that are really important. But then there's a spiritual aspect of wanting to become one. When you asked me earlier, well, what is sex to me? You have this portion of your spirit, which is whatever you want to call it, your daemon, your logic, your logos, whatever. And you have this portion of another person. That longing for this has a physiological response, but even beyond the physiological response, when you get past the hormones and the pre-ejaculate brain, there's this longing for reunion. There's this longing for like 2 drops of water to become 1 drop of water, to be that interconnectedness with all things. And sexuality has the ability to, through sexual ecstasy, to transcend that and for 2 to become not 2. That conflation, what the real meaning of yoga or union is. Mm-hmm. And that, the reunion of heaven and man, that's what that's about. But you can have that experience along with the orgasms without touching somebody's no parts until they become yes parts. But, trying to have that conversation.
I'm just looking at the time, and we're gonna. I mean, this is gonna be hard to stop because this
Sure.
is really, really
Sure.
fascinating, and we're gonna be doing this more, so we can continue a lot of this. But let's finish off with meeting the wife that you have now, and obviously you met her when you were a different time in your life. You were older. You've had 2 sons, so tell us a little bit about what that was like, and what has been different for you in that relationship.
So when I first met her, I just knew I had contract with her. I knew her. There was no doubt. It's not a logical thing. It's not a rational thing. I just knew. She saw portions of me. And at that time she met me, I wasn't really warm and fuzzy. I was still very much sort of disconnected from what you would call humanity, because when you travel a lot,
and you'd also been serving in a war, and that's a lot. Yeah.
So when she saw me, she just saw who I was, that me that I've been lifetime to lifetime. She saw that. And so it was like, this is a person I can grow with. It wasn't about sexuality. It wasn't about any of those things. And she's not a Taoist. She doesn't know any of those arts. They don't even make sense to her. But it was just somebody that I knew, this person can get me closest back to my original nature, and I can walk that path. And we've gone through so many things, and we're walking our paths, and sometimes the paths do this and sometimes the paths do this, but we're walking. But it was the person that I could be my most authentic self with, and come to go deeper into that authentic self, because she's a great mirror that I can see, oh, that's my bullshit. Oh, that's my gifts. And at this point, after 37 years of doing this, I'm pretty much at the experience of my life where it's like, yeah, I call myself out of my bullshit. I don't really carry bullshit around with me. I mean, obviously we all have our stuff, but I just go, no, that's bullshit. I'm not doing that. And so, but she's been very useful for that, because, she'll have things come up and she'll be like, well, you did this. And I'll be like, oh, I'm sorry, that's your bullshit. I see what I did there. And I can really own up to that. And then she gets to sit with it and go, wow, I mean, he's kind of right. And we just have this back and forth, and she'll be like, you kind of do this bullshit. I'm like, yeah, that's true. So we have this really deep, trusting, very honest. I mean, a lot of times,
was it that way in the very beginning? I mean, because she sounds very enlightened for a woman. Most women don't do that.
She is, but it took her a while to get there, and it took her a lot of upset. I mean, I'm not easy. It's very difficult. I know that you probably don't believe, like, he's adorable. What are you talking? I know. But you can't.
Well, you're a free spirit, and as you were saying, it's like, as women, we like to be able to know what our men's doing, and we like to be able to kind of control the situation. And you're not really someone to control.
After almost 10 years together, she still has no idea who I am. She's like, I don't know, maybe. But she's had to learn that that's just the way it's going to be. Now you can do that or you can not do that, and I'm cool either way. And it's led to a lot of things up and down, but that's a kind of a longer story. But it's to a point now where she's just like, okay, well, he's going to do him, and I'm going to be along for the ride. But she's grown exponentially. She said time and again, I would have never been able to get this honest with myself if you hadn't provided that for me. And honestly, I wouldn't have cared enough. I mean, she's taught me how to heal in terms of family, like having these boys. I didn't know how to be a father and relate, but now it's like they're amazing, except for when they're difficult, but that's her karma, and I just have to live with that. So that's
that's all on her. Well, one of the things I want to ask you about, because when you had your 2 sons, you delivered them. Am I right? Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, we had this experience where it was just like, I had delivered kids in the wild before, and we wanted to do this naturally. And not that hospital's not natural. It's just that didn't really see the need for the intervention. It was just a very normal thing or whatever. So the first one we had at a birthing center, just in case, because it was the first one. She was a little afraid. The second one, right next to the bed, in a pool, just put a inflatable pool, filled it up with water, and she had the children there, and it was a pretty mystical experience. I felt no pain. It was so natural. I felt so relaxed. I felt no pain. It was amazing.
Did she feel pain?
The first one, yes, in some ways because she was afraid, but it wouldn't have been. But the second one, no tearing, no ripping, no pain, nothing. It was pretty much it was almost like its own internal alchemy. It's pretty inspiring to watch. It's pretty cool.
For you to do that, and obviously you said that you had delivered children before, but that's still pretty ballsy in a certain way to have the confidence to say, I can do that.
But I'm saying the part of the people think, wow, he's really wise. No, I'm just dumb enough not to get in my own way. I mean, dogs go and find a hiding place and do it. And people in these rural communities do it all the time. So it's going to happen whether you like a guy with a, light on his head's there or not. But the thing is if you follow the way, right? And so I don't do Taoist philosophy. I follow the Tao. I'm a Taoist. And so if the Tao goes, well, this is how it works, I go, okay, well, then it's going to work that way. And it does. It works exactly the way it was intended to work. But first you have to understand how it works and then submit to that process. And where most humans go wrong is they try to control the process and then wonder why the Tao smacks the shit out of them.
Right. Exactly. And so having had 2 children out of a hospital where they are born and all of a sudden a lot of things are thrown into their eyes and needles go in and they're vaccinated, do you notice any difference between your children and children who are born in a hospital?
Yeah, they're much more curious, but and they don't have a lot of the stereotypical Western things of the insecurities. They don't have a lot of the uncertainties. We've pretty much just let them follow their nature. We don't do the unwilding or unschooling thing or whatever we do. They're gymnasts and all that kind of stuff, but they very much own their nature. They very much own it's okay to be who you are. It's okay to feel what you feel. It's okay to do what you do. And then it's okay to like what you like and be who you are. And so that it's gone very naturally that way. And so my oldest one's very dyslexic, but it wasn't a process where he had to go on medication. It just was a process where it's like, okay, well, we're going to do gymnastics and it's going to help your brain and we're going to work through it. So it's been a pretty interesting and amazing thing.
How old are they now?
8 and 6.
8 and 6. Wow. So similar ages to when your mother died and when you went into the monastery.
Yeah.
As they, very often they say when your child becomes the age that you were when an event, a really intense event happened, you have memories or even PTSD. Have you found that memories have come up for you as you've watched them grow, or what is the comparison? And we're going to end with this last question because kind of coming back to that childhood.
Yeah, no, I do. I don't have PTSD because I don't mind it. Yeah, I have the bad dreams. I have all those things like anybody. I just don't care. They don't bother me. They're just part of life. And I'm happy on my happy days and I'm happy on my sad days. And I don't mind being angry. I don't mind being afraid because those are just natural things. If I don't get upset at myself for being happy, I don't get upset at myself for it's okay to be wherever I am. And so when I have those things, I feel sad. Okay. And I just enjoy feeling sad because it's nice to feel sad sometimes. I don't induce it with a crazy movie, but I just enjoy my sadness. And then it allows me to live a much more authentic version of myself. And, there's some provocateurs out there. So you have to be very careful with that, because, but me, just a simple monk,
Keep telling yourself that, Lao. Well, I hate to get off from you, but we're going to be doing this again. Okay. And I just really love your stories and your life is just amazing. And thank you. You're so
very
much
welcome.
For joining
Thank you for having me
in this time today. And we'll continue this maybe next month.
Yeah, absolutely. Talk to you soon. Mwah.
Mwah. Thank you.
Bye.